Okay, welcome everyone to this February edition of the Kanban Coaching Exchange. Speaker tonight needs no introduction. He's spoken at Case a number of times and was co-host for a long part of Case's history. He's going to be giving us a relatively simple talk about complexity tonight, and I'll let Dan tell you a bit more about what he's been doing since the last time he's been at Case now.
Hey everyone, nice to see you. Nice to see some familiar faces, some non-familiar faces. I like to say some nice white names on black background. That works too, whatever works for you. But yeah, it's good to be back at KCE. It's been a while. And yeah, Kanban, that stuff, still been my main thing. So tonight I wanted to talk about complexity, but perhaps not the way that it's normally talked about. I've been to quite a few talks on complexity, and when I've seen people there, their reactions to them have been one of two things, like, whoa, yeah, this is for me. It's all about this. Why didn't we do this sooner? And other people going, okay. There were a lot of really weird words there. It was really deep. It was really arcane terms, terms that are very precise, but inaccessible. And why does it even matter to me? And if you were in the second group, that's what this talk's for. I want to try and make this nice and accessible, approachable, and simple. I want to simplify complexity as a concept. So I need to set my screen to share. If you'll just bear with me, I'm going to share my Miro board. And then because Zoom does that, I'm going to move you all back to where I am actually looking at you. Hopefully you can now see simplifying complexity. Is that working for everyone? Awesome. So I wanted to get a few points across at the start. Number one, I am not a complexity expert. I don't have anything new to say on complexity, and I'm probably going to get some of this stuff wrong. And I think that's okay. I don't think it really matters that I'm precisely perfect and correct. If I was an academic and I was pushing this and trying to posit new ideas, then perhaps I'd want to make sure I was perfectly correct and everything. But what I want to be is actionable. I want to give you something that makes this stuff useful when you go to your office or when you go to your clients. When I say that go to clients, I have used complexity frameworks many times to help many organizations determine the right approach in many situations. That isn't theoretical, that's practical. This is all stuff I've done. I'm a practicing coach as well as a trainer, and I've used complexity in my classes, but I've also used it with my clients. And I think they've all found benefit from it. And to the level of some of them said, that's the most useful thing you've taught us, Dan, which is awesome, I think, because, hey, it's not even part of Agile, right? But it's actionable in your everyday life. The next thing I want to point out is this. A little bit of psychology, if you like. We, as human beings, would like to have certainty about uncertain situations, even if it's false certainty. We crave it. I always say this is great. If you talk to your senior managers and stakeholders in an organization, they might tell you they want all of this business value, but actually what they want is certainty when things are uncertain. I think this pandemic has been a really good example of that. When we've had uncertain situations about lockdowns ending in different countries and when we'll be able to do this, when we'll be able to do that. Can I book my summer holiday for this year? We all crave that certainty about uncertain futures. And this is why we all love a Gantt chart. We all love a Gantt chart because it tells us exactly when it's going to finish, exactly how much it's going to cost and how great it's going to be and what it's going to look like. I mean, we all know it's wrong. Everyone goes in with their eyes open. No one's being fooled. We all absolutely know it's wrong, but we love this stuff. This is going to help us get to a better understanding of what we're talking about here. There are 3 points I would like to cover in this conversation. Let's hope it becomes a conversation. What is this complexity thing? Why should you care? And how do you make use of it? If you've got other questions than that, I'd love to know what they are. But at this level, I think that's the entry level for this stuff is, what is it? Why do I care about it? How do I actually use this thing? I do want to point out that that guy there is a driving expert, and he knows a lot more about driving. He's probably forgotten a lot more about driving than I will ever know. But I'm still capable of getting from A to B on the roads. Hey, with autopilot on my car, it's become so much easier. So that, I think, we often beat ourselves up. I'm not an expert in this, therefore I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to use this. No, you don't have to be an expert in driving cars to drive a car. You don't have to be an expert in maintaining cars to drive a car. You certainly don't have to know how to design a common rail diesel injection system to be able to drive a car. Driving a car is where most of us get the use. So let's do that. So I'm going to do a little thing where I just delete that. Question to the group. Please feel free to unmute and answer. Is that a pipe?
Yes.
Yes. 100. I've got some interesting answers in chat as well.
It depends what you're going to use it for.
Yeah. So Vlad's worked out what this is, I think, and Cormac as well. So this is one of my favorite paintings. It's over in San Francisco in the Museum of Modern Art, the MoMA. And I'm just going to, I'm going to long press to unlock. Show you the bottom part of it, which is in French. From the Belgian surrealist Magritte. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. And he's absolutely right. You can't smoke it. You can't put tobacco in it. You can't clean it. You can't do any of the things you can do with a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. And this painting is translated to The Treachery of Images by René Magritte. Models aren't the truth. They do not tell the truth about the situation you are in, but they can help you understand better what's going on. So it's very easy to look at a model and try and say, well, this is our situation. This is where we are. And actually, no, a model is just a thing to help you understand better. That's why so many of these are called things like sense-making frameworks. And that's absolutely fine. Just don't keep going and keep it and hold it and try and burst it. It doesn't matter. Use it as applicable and then move on. Use the model you like and make it applicable. And then you're all in a good place. So the first model of complexity most of us ever get introduced to is probably this one. The Stacey matrix by Ralph Stacey. I made them all nice and curly, and look what happened. They ended up being nice big square boxes. That's fine. I don't mind. It's good. All my prep comes to nothing. But the idea is we have a simple graph, technology against requirements. On the bottom left there, we have technology is close to certainty. We know how we're going to solve this problem. So this isn't about IT. It could be any problem. The approach we are going to take to solving the problem. That's what we mean by technology. And if we know that at the start, we're on the left-hand side of this graph. We're far from certainty. We don't know how we're going to solve the problem. We don't know what tools we're going to use. We just know we need to get from here to there. Okay. Shall we have a car journey? Is it going to be a train? Is it going to be a plane? You know, is there a COVID regulation that we have to conform to, or can we not even travel right now? All sorts of different things. Therefore, we're going to be far from certainty. Then requirements. What are we trying to achieve? Do we have a really good understanding? And regardless of what we do, that's not going to change, in which case we're down the bottom part of this graph. Or are we at that point where we have no idea what we're trying to do? So the two opposite corners are chaotic and simple. Chaotic is we don't really know what we're trying to do, and we haven't got any idea how we're going to do it. That's pretty uncertain, right? We've got a large amount of uncertainty. It's probably complex. On the other side, simple. We're close to certainty about what we're going to do, and no matter what we learn, we're not going to really learn anything while we're doing it. That's going to change our mind about what we're going to do. That's simple. So this gives us an easy way of understanding the dominant complexity of the problem space we're in. Oh, I've gone in with language early on. Dominant problem space complexity. So if we have those situations, we can say pretty much most of the things we're going to do, if it's simple, most of the things we're going to try and do are simple. If it's chaotic, well, we've got to work out how we do it there, but we're not sure what we're doing. We're not sure how we're going to do it. There are so many jokes I could make about Downing Street parties right now, but we'll move on, shall we? They won't stand the test of time, I doubt. Where it gets more interesting is complicated. So there are sort of two bits that stick out on simple for that. So we can be more uncertain about the technology, but we're still close to agreement on what we're going to do. Or we can be more uncertain about what we're going to do, but we're pretty much solid on our approach. And now we need this idea of complicated. Complicated isn't the same as complex. Complex is where it's gone a bit weird. We can't really sit down and think about the thing and understand it any better. To use those complicated words again, we're in the realm of non-determinism. It's non-deterministic by nature is complex. That means there are so many bits going on, we can't realistically understand all of the moving parts. Therefore, there's no way we can sit here before doing anything and understand it any better. This is why we have empirical methods. So when you come to something like Scrum, for example, Scrum is empirical. Scrum reinforces the empiricism model, empirical process control. Put my teeth in right. And that's because it's experimental. It starts with doing something, having a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, seeing how it went. If it's great, do more. If it's not great, do less. So this empiricism works really well if we're in this non-deterministic world where we can't just sit and think about it and understand the problem any better. If it's complicated, then we can. Can anyone tell me what the problem is with the Stacey matrix that everyone keeps pointing out? Save me from saying it.
Well, he's disregarded it himself, hasn't he?
Yeah, Ralph Stacey just deprecated this model and wishes people wouldn't use it. Now, I've got a problem with that because actually a lot of people really like this model. You know, it's a useful and accessible way to understanding how complex is things right now. So Stacey says, actually, if you look at the white arrow in there, there's a third axis. So it isn't going into the top corner where chaotic is. It's actually going back into a 3D graph called people. And that thing with people. So yeah, it becomes a bit complex. Basically, Stacey has come back to everything's complex. As far as I can understand it now, Stacey is a proper academic. He's known more about complexity and forgotten than I will ever know. Absolutely. He's a bit like Lewis Hamilton in the driving here. So I'm not going to have a go at anything. Why would I? I just want to take what I can and use it. What this will do is it'll help me understand where we're at. And okay, it doesn't have to be right for it to be useful. Can anyone else think of another complexity model that we might want to look at? Is anyone thinking Welsh words right now?
Cynefin.
Cynefin.
Habitat.
Good old Cynefin. So props to David Snowden for coming up with this one. I think it's 21 years old now, so it's not a new thing when rocking about, but it might be the first time you've heard of it tonight. I would like to point out, this is not a 2x2 matrix. This is a folded napkin. There's different altitudes with different bits of this. So this little loopy bit down here that I'm pointing at, down the bottom, that highlights there that the clear domain is higher up than the chaotic domain. Now, at first impression, you might think, well, clear, that sounds a bit like simple. Complicated sounds like complicated. Complex sounds like complex. And chaos and chaotic sound like the same thing. Awesome. We can just map that. And you kind of can. It's not perfect, but you kind of can. And it's enough to be useful, right? But there are 3 main domains in this model. Not 4, as it looks like. The 2 on the right-hand side, complicated and clear, can be summarized as the ordered domain. So things tend to be either ordered, complex, or chaotic. When it comes to ordered, what do we mean is the difference between them? Well, if it's clear, any reasonable adult watching what you're doing when you're doing that clear thing will know what you're doing and understand how to do it. If it's complicated, you might need some expertise to understand what's going on here. The example I always like to think about is one of my favorite TV shows is The Repair Shop, which shows on the BBC in the UK. And people take their broken stuff and get it fixed. And some of the stuff that gets taken is clockwork. And there's this guy called Steve. And I'm sure Steve could fix any clockwork problem ever without having seen the thing before. He's just been doing clockworks and horology for his entire life. like his dad before him. There's nothing he wouldn't know about a clockwork system. Now, you or I might not know much about clockwork systems and might not know if what happens if you turn this cog 360 degrees, what will happen to the minute hand? We'd be like, no idea. He would just start counting teeth, get a bit of paper out and go, this is exactly what's going to happen. And he'd understand it and he'd be right. So you can see how that stuff on the right-hand side, because it's ordered, because it's deterministic, you can use analysis, you can use expertise and think about the problem before you try and solve it, and you will understand it better. So analysis works in this domain really well because that's applying our understanding and expertise to understanding the problem that we're trying to solve. So if this side's ordered, the other side must be not ordered, so non-deterministic, which is what I was kind of trying to explain earlier, complex and chaotic. You cannot think about the problem and understand it any better when it's on that hand side. You've got to do something. Now let's talk about chaotic first. Let's go with the absolute crisis situation. It's 3 a.m. You're all in bed asleep at home. Okay, certainly in my house you would be. And the fire alarm goes up. The smoke alarm goes off. What do you do? Shall we quickly have a planning meeting to work out our approach? So what do we do?
Run.
Well, I'm going to suggest you don't run, but swiftly and efficiently and carefully leave the building with all of your family. But the idea is we want to act. So the first thing we do when we have this domain going on to understand what's happening is act. Then perhaps everyone's outside and you do a bit of sensing. Okay, how bad is the fire? Are we all out? Did we miss anybody? That kind of stuff. Because if you missed anybody, you might want to respond and go back and get somebody. This idea of the first thing you must do is act. Because if you don't act, it's not safe, right? It's not safe to not act. So you must act. And you got to hope your act is good. What would this look like in the business context? Do you remember Nokia when they used to be big at selling mobile phone handsets? Yeah, they had massive market share, millions of handsets sold per day, to out of business with 0 employees in 7 years. All because this bloke stood on a stage in Cupertino and said, I'm going to make the only device you want to have in your pocket. And they were unable to act in time. They did act, but their action was not successful. You tend to only hear about things coming out of chaos that are successful, unless you want a big failure story. But the idea is first thing you do in the chaotic domain is act. The next thing you might want to think about is, well, what about complex? How is that different? Well, here we don't act first. We run a probe. Let's make that a different color. Can anyone tell me what we mean by probe?
Run an experiment.
Yeah, investigate.
I kind of think
Investigate.
we should probably tell Zori that her camera is on at this stage. Thank you. Please go badly. Sorry, so I got completely distracted by that then. But so by probe, we mean...
Analyze.
Obviously, it means run a safe-to-fail experiment. Design a safe-to-fail experiment. A probe. The point is, there's a big difference between acting and probing. Act is not safe to fail, but we're in a situation where if we don't do something, bad things are going to happen anyway, right? Whereas with a probe, you're not in that situation. You don't have to. It's not a life or death situation, but you want to try something. So if you've ever heard agilists going on saying, hey, let's make this a safe to fail experiment. This is exactly what we're talking about. A designed safe to fail experiment. So you can start using scientific method, have a hypothesis. If we do this, we will get that. Design an experiment to test if that hypothesis works or not. Design your measures before you run the experiment, then run it and see which way the measures come out. Do more, do less. So we can now do this idea of probe, sense, respond. Probe, we run the experiment. We design, run the experiment. Sense, we check the measures. Did it make things better? Did it make things worse? Respond. Do more of that, do less of that. And it almost doesn't matter if the experiment goes well or badly, because either way, when you're in this complex domain, you need knowledge. What you want to do is reduce uncertainty, isn't it? That's reducing complexity. So we want to get out of this complex domain and just make the problem complicated. If you have looked at this model, it won't be very long until you've heard the word liminal, which you probably thought, well, that sounds really cool. What the hell does liminal mean? So I'm going to back up David Snowden, who created this model on this. Sometimes we use very specific and very technical words. And if you don't understand them, please just ask. Please ask somebody, because if they're using that word and they don't know, that's a good thing to find out in the first place. But this isn't a really difficult thing. So liminal. So what does liminality mean? Well, I'm glad you asked me that question, because I do know the answer, because I thought I would need want to know that before I talk to you. So liminality is a state of suspended transition. So in this idea of moving from one domain to the other, but we stay where we are. So it's a state of suspended transition. And in Cynefin, we have 4 liminal domains. The first one is the complicated and complex. Whoops, let me just unlock that so I can get to my bits. And the liminal domains, the liminal parts, I should say, are all these green bits. So you can see 4 bits of liminality, as we know. It's a good word, isn't it? You can do a lot of things with the word liminal. Sounds really clever and all. But this big area here, this big green area, is the complex and complicated liminality. This is the agile space. This is when you're doing agile, this is what you pretend all of the work looks like. And it might be, but it might not. Because here's another nasty, inconvenient truth time. Inconvenient truth. You're not in one of these 4 domains. You're in all of them, all the time. But one usually dominates the current problem space. Therefore, if you know which one you're in, you can make a better decision about the approach you take. But in this area of complicated to complex, this is where Agile lives. Agile loves it. If I can draw with my pen. Just there. So it's a bit intercomplicated, but it's complex. So the problems we're typically solving are the ones that really matter. The approach is well known. I mean, if you're writing software, we're pretty good at that these days. We're pretty good at knowing how to write software. I mean, the problem you're solving is the only thing that really is changing there. Or if you're building something out of stainless steel, we're pretty good at that now as well. So the technology side of things, once you understand what you're going to do and the approach, then it gets to be complicated. Yes, you need people with specific skills and learns and those sort of things, but you've got to go on. Oh my God, I'm not doing just a minute. Hesitation. I shouldn't have the comments open. It doesn't do me any good, does it? But I'll take that as Dan. Take a breath every now and then. And thank you for your feedback. Move that off. So yeah, talking about liminality. The one thing I haven't talked about is this little bit in the middle, this grey bit. It's got an AC. The C stands for confused. And that's where you start in this model. You're confused because you don't know which area of complexity is dominating right now. And this is the thing. For each of these 4 domains, in light blue is an approach you should take. And they're different in each domain. If you don't know which area of complexity is dominating right now, which approach are you going to take? This is where your default kicks in. So I was lucky enough to be at Government Digital Service back in the day when it was all kicking off. And we talked about Agile by default. Notice we didn't say Agile exclusively. We said Agile by default. That's because we thought most of the work we do is knowledge work, and by default tends to be complex. Therefore, the best default approach probably isn't something that's good on the right-hand side, like project management. So let's use something that's good for that liminal space, complex, complicated. Let's give it a go with that. And this is the thing. I want to ask you a question. Has any of you ever been to Disney World before? Could you shout or put your hand up or something if you have?
Yes.
Yes.
What was your main activity within the land of Disneyland or Disney World? What is the main thing you did by time?
Walked
Walking?
around.
Queued up.
Queuing. You say, this is where I'm going to tell you, you should have talked to me first. I've been to Disney World a few times, and the longest queue I've stood in is 15 minutes. Because I wasn't agile at Disney World. I can tell you what agile looks like at Disney World. You come off of Space Mountain, which was your first ride, and go, well, what did we think of that? Let's have a quick review. Let's have a quick retrospective, find out how we can do this stuff better. Okay, where are we going next? Oh, let's go on the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. Fantastic, let's go. And you get there and you enter a 2-hour queue. You do a 2-minute ride and you get off. And what we're going to do next? Then you walk across the next thing and you get in the next queue. And then you realize it's a bit hot and you were dehydrated and the kids are getting tired because they're a long way from home and they're jet lagged. And you see, actually, the activity I've seen more in afternoons at Disney World than anything else is parents shouting at their children for not enjoying themselves in Disney World, which does kind of defeat the entire purpose. But this is the point. There is data out there. I can tell you right now, because I subscribe to the data, how busy each of the 4 Disney World parks will be on any given day for the next year. I already can look at that. And there's only one little factor that will change that. This isn't a complex scenario. It's well understood. There's data. If I use Agile there, I'm going to queue and I'm going to have a miserable time. But if I actually plan it, and I'm talking about start over a year ahead, book your restaurant 6 months ahead, book all of the different hotels you're going to need. You might only be staying in one. You need to book more than one in order to get the right fast passes and so on. You need to plan all this stuff, well ahead. And okay, you're not necessarily going to go to a park every day, but you have a plan for a park that day in case you decide to. You know which park and which rides. And this will therefore mean you get to do all of the major rides without any of the massive queues. And it's really actually quite simple. If you go in, give me a shout. I'll give you the real rundown on the whole thing. But it's actually, once you understand what's going on, it's kind of complicated. It's liminal into clear almost. It's kind of on that border. Once you know about it, it's really easy. I mean, the easiest thing I can tell you is go to the park before it opens. People are on their holidays. They want to lie in and a fancy breakfast. They get busy at 11:30. Get all the good rides before 11:30. That alone will save you about an hour's queuing. But anyway, the point is the right approach in the right situation will be more effective. So understanding when you are confused which domain to go to, which domain's approach to go to is great. Now, if you want to rewind and go back to Stacey for understanding the domain, awesome. That's really easy. It tells you about where am I in terms of my requirements, where am I in terms of my equality. Okay, I kind of feel like I'm on here. Okay, so if it's complicated, which approach do I take? Oh, that means I need to get some analysis going. Have a think about it, run some analysis, respond based on that. Or it's complex. All right, let's run an experiment. Let's get empirical on this thing. The right approach in the right situation will be much more effective.
If you don't need a tuition, I'm not going to force you to do tuition.
And that's a kid who's heard me talk about Disney World, I'm guessing. So what else do we want to talk about? Constraints. Constraints are all managed all over there. So another way of understanding what's going on is constraints. So governing constraints. Governing constraints are the rules within you can operate. But once you're within the rules, you can kind of do what you want. That's as simple as that. So if you are, if you are going to be taking a boat out on a river for the first time and you've never driven a boat, here is the simple constraint that you need to know. You stay on the right-hand side. All boats drive on the right-hand side. If everyone drives on the right-hand side, we're not probably going to have a major crash here. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to hit the bank. You're not going to hit another boat head on. Good stuff. And that works on a canal, on a river. We go on the right-hand side in boats. Governing constraint. Now, there may be situations where you don't follow that rule. But in general, we follow that rule when we're in a boat. When you're driving in the UK, you stay on the left. Unless you need to swerve out of the left-hand side to avoid crashing into somebody crossing the road, a bunch of kids or something. Then you're going to do that. Obviously, these constraints aren't hard and fixed. They're not stopping you doing things. Whereas if we have clear stuff, it's fixed. It's good. It's a given. It's a absolutely fixed constraint. You can't change the constraints down there. There are some extra words on this thing. There's a really complicated word on there called exaptive, but there's good, novel, best, and exaptive. Do we know what we mean with that? Anyone got an idea what that actually stands for? Not what the word means, but what those bits of blue writing are. Good, exaptive, novel, and best. The practices. Now, does anyone here know who invented best practice as a concept?
Taylor?
Yeah, Frederick Winslow Taylor. So Freddie Taylor, if you've ever heard of Taylorism, that's him. If you've ever heard of reductionist theory, that's him. If you ever heard of time and motion studies, that was him. And best practices, that was him. And he wrote papers about all of these things. And what he had to say on best practices, in order for your workers to follow best practice, they must be dumber than an ox. Now, is anyone of you right now working in an organization that has that as its hiring policy? I'm guessing not, right? No one's trying to hire people who are dumb. So perhaps forcing on people the way they need to do jobs isn't the way forward. Now, a clear example is changing a barrel of beer in a pub. Changing the barrel of beer on a tap. Now, if you watch somebody changing a beer barrel, you'd probably understand it. And if you had a go, you'd probably spill a lot of beer on yourself. If you follow the best practice, you wouldn't. So there's a simple one. This is the way you do it. Just learn the way and everybody's good. And that works really well down there. When things are complicated, you've got experts. Remember Steve, my horologist who can fix all the clockwork? He's not the only one. There are loads of them. But Steve does things the way Steve was taught to do things. Now, if you talk to some other equally experienced and equally talented horologist, they probably have a different way of solving the problem. Would there be any benefit at all in making Steve follow this other guy's way of doing it? I want to suspect that that would be wasteful and get a load of resistance. It turns out, and I know this is going to sound like rocket science, people don't like it when other people tell them what they have to do, especially if it means change. I've been an overweight man for quite some time. And many people have said to me over the years, Dan, you should lose some weight. It'll do you good if you lose some weight. To which my response is, thank you very much for your feedback, without using the word thank. I used a different word instead and went and had a bit of cake. But eventually I decided I needed to lose some weight. And you'd never guess, but I lost some weight because I decided intrinsic change, autonomy. These are really big things and really important for people. So as soon as you're out of that clear domain, best practice is a no-no. Don't do it. Agile and best practice are not friends. What we have there instead is exaptive practice, which we all understand innately, so I'll move on. Okay, I understand that. I've just used one of them words again, haven't I? Exaptive. Now, exaptive does have a definition. And this is pretty much exactly a dictionary definition of exaptive. Having a function different to that for which it evolved. Again, very precise terminology. What that means is, when things are exaptive, you might want to try something from another domain to see if it works here. So taking one of those good practices that worked so well over here and running it here and saying it must work like that is not effective. But taking one of those good practices and saying, I wonder what will happen if I try that here. And it might just stumble across something that's really effective. So this idea of running them as experiments over here. So we want to have stuff that emerges from how we do it ourselves, but also we take stuff that works in other places and give it a go. But we do it experimentally, deliberately experimentally. We're not saying this is the way. We're saying, this is a thing. You might be able to try that here. This worked at another organization a bit like ours that was having a similar kind of problem. Maybe that might work here. It might not, but it might too. So it's worth having a go. And that's all exaptive means. It's a very precise word, but it's an existing word that was appropriate. So David put it in there. Then novel practices. Have you ever heard the expression, necessity is the mother of invention? That's what we were saying with novel practices. When things are survival, we come up with stuff that we'd never come up with in any other given scenario. And that's all we're saying here. You only hear about the stuff that works pretty well. I didn't talk about enabling and no, that's not the way, Andrew. Enabling constraints, I didn't talk about them. Enabling constraints are constraints that enable us to do something. So we set some constraints in place and give it a go. So the classic example is an art teacher. An art teacher might say, here is a tank full of stick insects for you to spend your entire art lesson drawing. And that's boring, right? I mean, I don't know if you do art. I like a bit of art. He said, that's one of my dads in the background, that is. But, you know, art's exciting and interesting, but a tank full of lemon stick insects, oh, man. So you have another look and go, well, I've got to draw this tank of stick insects. But if you look there, you can see a reflection out the window of that building over there, and that's really quite interesting. So maybe I'll have the stick insect in the corner, but we'll focus in on that. And this constraint has given me the ability to be creative within there. Because what would happen if the art teacher just came in and said, do what you like? Well, my very good friend Tobias Mayer put me onto this, and he said what happened in his old art lessons when his art teacher was lazy like that was some people sat around and did nothing. Some people do things they already knew how to do, like they were really good at drawing eyes, so they'd sit and show off and draw eyes, but they didn't learn anything. Nobody learned anything. Other people were just stifled by the plethora of choice and therefore did nothing because they couldn't think of what to do in time. But in pretty much all cases, nothing was learned. By putting these enabling constraints in place, it allows us to play within that space, and then we can always change the constraints later and try something different. So in this complex domain, we do that. So what haven't I turned about? I've talked about determinism, non-determining, constraints, non-constraints. Yeah. When we talk about enabling constraints, it's about connections. So if you haven't seen this video, I will post the link to this and make this available to you after the talk. But this video here, David does a really interesting chat about this one. And he gets into that. He says, there's this really evil practice we have called trying to change other people. And it's not nice. Nobody wants to be changed. I mentioned the whole cake thing. No one wants to be changed. And it's a pretty evil thing to try and do that to somebody. But we want to have this organizational transformation. So we need to change the people, right? In actual fact, what you want to do is change the connections between the people. That'll be far more effective. Don't change the people. Just put them in contact with other people and allow them to continue and work it out for themselves. This is the true nature of complex systems. It's not about the nodes of knowledge. It's about the connections between them. If you want to know more about that, I suspect you want to look at what happens at GCHQ, the Government Intelligence Agency in the UK. I'll tell you this, they hire for more diversity than any other organization in the world that I know of. Yes, they want gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and all of the other obvious diversities, but they also hire deliberately for neurodiversity, hire for people with dyspraxia, dyslexia, autism, Asperger's. They actively hire these people. Anybody who might think about the same problem in a different way. And then they put them in a building that's donut shaped. Why is that important? It causes you to take the longest path from where you are to where you're going, which causes you to have the most accidental, unintentional conversations that you can have with other people. So you might end up talking about the football, which leads you to say something, which makes Vlad say something, which makes Brett say something, which makes Don say something, which makes Andrew say something, which makes me say something. And now we know about a terrorist threat that was going to go on next week. None of us individually knew anything that was significant enough, but having these connections and accidental conversations, this is how intelligence experts work deliberately. That's why those buildings are shaped that way. That's why they are treated like that. And that's why they're higher for people who might think about the same thing differently and cause us to ask these questions. So what does that mean? I promised to simplify this stuff, and I'm not sure I actually have. I've tried to explain it a little bit. What it means is, before you decide what you're going to do with a new problem, have a quick think about it. Is it complex or is it complicated? Most things usually fall into those two, I'll be honest. When you're doing a new thing, it's going to be one of those two more often than not. Take the approach, therefore, that is suited to one of them. Because if you go into that middle domain of confused and stay there, the only choice you can make about the approach you take is whatever you normally do, whatever your preference is. You stick an agilist in Disney World without any thinking about it, and they're going to do agile, and they're going to get a lot of queuing. You take a project manager into something that's complex, and they're going to try and project manage their way out of it. That's the nature of the thing, whether it's appropriate to use that approach in that domain or not. The best leading indicator I know of for which approach should be taken for work is the complexity. So stop and have a think about it. Then, if you're in the chaotic domain, act first. Get out of the burning house before you stop and have a think about it if you're in a chaotic domain. But everywhere else, stop, have a think. What do I need to do? Do I need to be experimental and empirical? Or do I need to plan this? Do I need to actually write the things down and do some analysis here? That, I think, can be one of the most useful things you can ever do. I also wanted to point out this little thing. I've taken straight from the Cynefin.io website. Cynefin is Welsh for place of multiple belongings. I love that as a sentence, because there's no direct English translation, but what is a place of multiple belongings? So you can belong in lots of places. This place, your complexity might be complex and complicated and clear at different points of its life cycle. In fact, we often end up drawing circles. I kind of like to think of the way of approaching this complex stuff is, how can I reduce the complexity? What experiment can I run that will take some of that complexity away? Run an experiment, find out if this approach is heading in the right direction, and I've made it less complex. It's less uncertain now. And I'm moving it more towards that liminal space and into complicated. And then by the time I can just write some software or build something, if I'm building a house, you end up, that's just complicated. You just need to learn the skills to be able to do those things. And if you are writing software, well, computers can only do one thing, right? They can add zeros and ones together really quickly. That's pretty clear. So by the time you write software, the thing that's running it is doing things pretty simple, pretty clearly, just very fast. So we're going in these little circles, and you might want to dip through chaotic to pull some of those things out. People make things complicated. Is that true? Yes, that is, I think, true. The more people you have, the more complex. I don't know how many people are on this call right now. I think it says 51. If there are 51 people on this call, just imagining that everyone on this call is paying attention, that means we've got at least 52 different truths about what happened today. One for each of us. Well, ideally one for each of us. You never know. Some people might have more truths about what happened in this session than what actually happened. There's another one. We all remember this differently, and we all, we all perceive the world through our own mind and our own framework, our own model, if you like. So is everything complex? Kind of. But at the same time, I know Disney World is a place of many queues, and I don't want to stand in many of them. Therefore, I know an approach from the right-hand side will work really well. Now, theoretically, it might be that everyone's complex. And I'm going to play my I don't really care card on that one. Like I said, I'm not an academic expert, so I don't have to be right. I just have to say, this works here and that works there. And that's been really effective for me. And that's what I think we need to get out of complexity. Let's not go right down to the weeds. You don't need to. Just take out of this model what you want from it. It's not a pipe. It's just a picture of a pipe. No one's ever experienced your complexity like you have before. That's new. So I'm going to quickly delete that and say conclusions. I don't believe we have to use archaic terms to express stuff. I think we can make it simpler. I think it's our responsibility to make it simple for other people. Yes, that always is going to run the risk of dumbing it down. I don't know. I've had that argument with people before, some of the thought leaders in our communities, but had an interesting one with David Anderson at a Kanban leadership retreat about dumbing stuff down. Actually, that was quite an interesting one by itself. But the point I'm trying to get to is it doesn't have to be dumbed down. It has to be made more accessible and simple. Sometimes the cutting edge stuff is PhD level, but you shouldn't have to have a PhD to make use of this stuff. You don't have to understand how to build an engine to drive a car. So let's just take the bit that's drivable. What's the domain of complexity? What approach works best? Let's use that. Because it's the best leading indicator I know for the approach I should use. David Snowden says this, and I absolutely believe he's right. Decide the nature of the system before you decide the nature of the intervention. Work out what's going on with the complexity of stuff before you decide how you're going to approach the work. That's all that means. I believe the right approach in the right problem space will help you succeed, whether it's all complex or not. Cynefin, is equivalent to asking someone, what do you do? To which the response would be, it depends. Well, what does it depend on? It depends on the complexity of the problem space. What should I do? I should run an experiment if it's complex, or if it's in that liminal space at the top. I should define a project and get on with it if it's complicated. Perhaps using lean, I should perhaps try and automate as much as I can if it's on that top right-hand quadrant. It's just doing the same thing over again, effectively. Let's automate that. Let's make that repeatable. Let's make that good practice repeatable. That's all automation really is. It's all robots actually do. You know, welding's quite tricky, but robots that have been designed to weld are very good at doing the same weld over and over and over again. I think that's all I've really got to say on the topic. I kind of feel like I've petered out, but I would like to open up the floor to questions. So if you want to stick your hand up, let's do it out loud. Mike, you win. You went first. And hold my beer. I'm going in.
Hi, Dan. Thanks very much for the discussion. Really interesting. So I think one thing that I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about, if you want to zoom into your Cynefin domains.
Sure.
So one thing you didn't really discuss was the waterfall between clear and chaotic and complacency. I think it might be worthwhile just elaborating on that.
Yeah, I think that's where you take the same approach and suddenly find yourself in chaos. So the example I've typically used on that one is Nokia. If you go back to where Nokia were in their height, they knew how to build, market mobile phones, right? You get a lump of plastic that looks like the next phone, you stick it in the next Bond movie, and then by the time the film comes out, generate a bit of false scarcity. That way it always drives up your demand a little bit, and have the phone ready, and off you go. By which time they're already shooting the next Bond film with the next lump of plastic, or the Matrix with the slide phone. Remember the slide phone? How excited we all about that in the first Matrix and how old it is now. Nearly looks as bad as the computer graphics in Star Wars, the first one from the 70s, you know, little TIE fighters and things. But yeah, they had that approach of how to continue. And then suddenly Steve Jobs says, I'm going to make the only device you want to have in your pocket. And the same old approach wouldn't work. So this is what we talk about complacency. By assuming it's always going to be like it is now in the future, you can fall off. And like I said, it's a folded napkin. So this little loopy bit here represents clear is much higher up than chaotic. And there is a cliff you can fall down. And if you fall down a cliff, it's really hard to go back, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you fall down a cliff and don't break your legs, go for a walk around. So if you come, let's draw it. A green pen. If you go from here and you fall down there, don't try and go back because the cliff's hard. Try and go around.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I think Dave Snowden often warns people that clear, although it seems the easiest, actually can can be the most dangerous, because you can get complacent and you can fall into chaotic very quickly.
Well, I think it's this thing we have in society where we always have to be evolving and changing. If things are staying the same, we get very nervous. The classic is, imagine a major international company that announces record results in 2021, then announce exactly the same results in 2022. It's a disaster. We didn't improve on last year's results. We always have to be improving. But yeah, we achieved the biggest profit we've ever achieved again. Yeah, it's still really bad. We didn't improve. It's always got to be better, better, better. And this idea of stagnation, and if we stay the same, it'll stagnate. And that almost seems like an innately human thing, that we always want to be improving and getting better. I don't know if this is something about the way we learn, and therefore we always want to keep learning, and you know, perhaps our upbringing as children. I always think, if you want to know what humans are like, look at children. You know, the classic argument you hear from kids is, that's not fair. And I think that really matters. We care about fair an awful lot as human beings. A lot of our psychology is built on that's fair or that's not fair or that's unfair. And it kind of is innately in us, as we're loss aversion machines and we hate things that are unfair. But I always think, look at kids. Okay, you'll see some nasty behaviors because kids are nasty, but you'll also see how sort of natural human behaviors as well. And they're always learning, always. We don't give them a choice, right?
Precisely.
Any other thoughts, questions, opinions?
Yeah, I have one, Dan. Super interesting talk, by the way. I really liked it.
Okay.
Do you think it's always it's always obvious which domain you're in?
No.
Like, might you have to go to Disneyland and make a mistake and be agile before you realise actually it's a complicated plan-based environment to be in?
You know what? That's probably an awesome question, and this is one of those moments of the worst thing about a project post-mortem is it happens after the project's already dead. You know, it's post-mortem, right? Nothing changes that's of use because it's already happened. So how do you get out of that? And this idea of what you want, a regular health check, right? And so certainly if you're a scrummist, and I put my hands up, I'm a scrummist, absolutely, I love Scrum. You know, we do this sprintly heartbeat of a sprint retrospective. If you're doing Kanban, and then you'll use the Kanban cadences like retrospection, like flow review, like workflow service reviews, to actually check how things are going and are we getting better? Are we taking the right approach to these things? So having these feedback loops baked in is absolutely essential. Now, Kanban doesn't rely on complex, complicated, or clear. I think Kanban's equally applicable everywhere outside of chaos, because chaos, just get on with it. It's already too late if you're talking about it, if you're in chaos. But for everywhere else, I think Kanban's an effective way of actually doing things. I know there's been discussion in that space. I don't want to reopen wounds, because let the experts argue about it, and I'll see what happens. But I've had success with it there. But having those feedback loops of, you know, and this is the thing is, do we always have to get it right? Or does it have to be right enough that what we do is effective? Because the problem is, if you use Agile in things that you shouldn't use Agile, then it's inefficient, it's messy, it's noisy, it's got all this extra stuff. You've got collaborative, where collaboration's a great way of doing things which are complex, because you've got multiple minds speaking out loud at each other. And your brain is far more intelligent out loud than it is when you're trying to, headphones on in silence. The example, I've used this in a few classes of mine, but let's say if it works with you a lot, there's a lot of you here. You're expert. Have you ever been stuck? Yeah. Have you ever, because you're a human with an ego and an id, been stuck and not asked for help immediately, but thought, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to lick it. And eventually you didn't. So you decided to ask somebody to help. Now, depending on your personality, you went to an expert who could help you, or you went to somebody who had less of a clue than you, so you still felt good. And at this point, you tell them the story of your problem. And you followed it up with these magic words. Are you still with me? Yeah. Never mind, I've worked it out. How is that a repeatable pattern that we can all relate to? What's so special about telling the story out loud? Now, Dave Snowden, the guy behind Cynefin, says, Homo sapiens is extinct. We are now Homo neurans. the storytelling apes. Stories are really important to us, I think. I've told a story. You've listened to a story. Hopefully they were similar. But you know what I mean? We live by stories an awful lot. But the act of telling somebody else the story of the problem caused us to understand the problem in a different way, especially if they did the best favor they can ever do, which is to ask you dumb questions. Because dumb questions, I think, are the best. They cause you to pull this face. I'm trying to think of my problem from your point of view face, which gives us a different understanding, which relates back to the whole GCHQ thing, doesn't it? Of the different approaches to thinking about problems and just different approaches to thinking. Causes us to understand the problem from a different perspective, which causes us to be more intelligent. And if you do this in a CAT scanner, trying to solve a problem silently, little bits in the center of your brain light up. Trying to solve a problem out loud, you've got neurons firing everywhere. It's like a fireworks party. You're just more intelligent out loud. So having the conversation, having a retro, having a feedback loop is super important. And getting it wrong can teach you a lot more than when you get it right, typically, right? You learn more from mistakes than getting it right, mostly. It's almost like we should deliberately try and get it wrong so that we learn more at the start. There's got to be a method in that. I don't know if anyone's come up with one. Anyway, Andrew's been waiting really patiently with his hand up. He's going to knock his guitar down.
Thanks, Dan. No, I really enjoyed it, so thank you. Working with British Army at the moment, this is a really effective tool, and it brought to mind, you reminded me of my favorite book, Douglas Hubbard, How to Measure Anything. And it strikes me that there's increasing cost as you go anti-clockwise around that loop in terms of the measurement. Mm-hmm. So you are measuring in different ways to generate a situational awareness. So you're using different instruments, different methods to generate situational awareness, which means you can then take some action. So one of the things that we're talking about in traditional project management techniques versus the more agile flavors is there's increased transaction coordination costs, right? So you only deploy the agile techniques when you really need to. But that depends on, so there's a cost of the measurement, and it depends on your tolerance for risk. So if you think things are fairly okay and pretty straightforward, you're going toe to toe with somebody that you think you can easily beat, you're probably going to treat it like a complicated event and just plan it and hit it hard. But if you're going up against an adversary who is, it's jungle warfare, right? It's going to be chaotic. And so and this is embedded in doctrine as well. So the way you engage with it is a function of the collective mindset and its ability to understand what is being told and situational awareness. Because quite often we're seeing organizations do things and they believe that the situation is complicated or clear. And so they'll just go about it with best practice or good practice.
And I think there's a thing, you remind me of one of my favorite quotes, and I have to paste this in. Let's see if that works. Oops, I have to click on it first. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So one of Mike Tyson's quotes, everyone approached a fight like Mike Tyson, like a normal boxing match. And they had a plan for dealing with Mike Tyson. And then Mike Tyson punched them in the mouth. And they went, new plan. Let's not do that again. This isn't just someone else. It's Mike Tyson. I see. And I think this is the thing. We often focus on that. And actually, this talk was nearly a completely different talk. I was going to bring it in measures. I am really frustrated with how we measure and what we measure, especially in the agile world. I'm sick of hearing about velocity as if it's a measure. It's not. Because the work we do is complex or liminal complex, you cannot think about it at the start and understand it. Therefore, an estimate is just a guess. And it always has to be by definition if the work is complex. So, and we never go back and refine it afterwards and find out what it was. So velocity is nonsense. And even then, worse than that, it's a stupid thing to measure. How much work we got done, who cares? Agile teams deliver value. Why aren't we measured the value per sprint? The value velocity is the only thing that actually matters, isn't it? Why are we? It's as if we do lots of work and that's a good thing. Isn't that literally the opposite of half of the agile principles, like simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done? How does velocity help you in that space? It does my, I got passionate, sorry. I went to color and everything. But this is the thing, we spend so much time measuring the wrong stuff and pretending it tells us something about a system. And the big one I go on about, you'll have heard me. So Andrew and I know each other from the Kanban University Train the Trainer class. I go off on this one a lot, but this idea of, you know what, I'm going to back off. I'm going to back off on that because we're near the end and Dan's doing his thing where he goes off on one. So I'll back off on that. I have thought better. And another thing. Anyone else got any questions, thoughts, concerns? How to measure value?
I was quite enjoying the rant there, Dan, bro.
Yeah, I was too.
Oh dear.
Do you want to take the value one? If not, Lester has his hand up.
Oh, the value one, seriously, cost of delay, or impact of delay if you're not in money. It's really easy when you can say this one's worth 10 million a day. Do that one. You know, that thing's valuable. Do it. I mean, it's unknowable even after the fact. So it's always going to be a bit of a made up guess in of itself, but at least it's a made up guess about the right thing. So, you know, what I mean, even after the fact, well, imagine you work at the McDonald's marketing department and you do a wonderful marketing thing and about the Big Mac and it sells more and more Big Macs get sold. Is that because of your wonderful marketing thing or because Burger King didn't do a thing on a product, a veggie burger that nobody actually wanted or they ran out of stock? Is it because KFC ran out of chicken? Is it because of all of these other things? And of course, it's not because of one thing, it's because of lots of things. So you don't know the true business value of the thing you did. You can only kind of infer that things were better by this order of magnitude because we did that thing. So it's unknowable even after the fact, never mind before the fact. But like I said, at least it's about the right thing, isn't it? Anyhow, let's move on.
I should change that actually. It's Rex actually. I don't know why it's like, that's very formal, isn't it? This is more of an observation and perhaps a question at the end, which is because you sort of answered some of the things that a lot of the organizations I go into, they treat software development of a product as a clear or a complicated thing, and they don't want to admit that it's complex. So even though they're doing perhaps agile, they don't quite get it that this is complex. This isn't because they're used to project managing a building. We know what we're doing. Building a submarine, we know what they're doing. They actually called themselves complex systems, but they treated everything in a sort of a complicated or simple way. You know, building a submarine isn't complicated. Building the software that goes on it was, right? But they had to treat it in that way. And my problem is, how do you take them from that space to admitting that it's complicated? Now, you could sit back and let them be punched in the face a few times, but I've seen that happen, and it doesn't always work. In light of being punched repeatedly, they do not change. They keep going with the same approach.
Well, this is the thing, and this is why coaching is holding up the mirror, isn't it? It's showing them the truth about what's going on sometimes, and sometimes the mirror's got a tint. But I think this is where Stacey is really helpful, actually, because the act of writing software, you know, that is actually fairly close to certainty. Once you understand how to write software, writing software is actually fairly straightforward. And if I was to say a typical theoretical problem like knock us up a bubble sort, you know, hopefully you'd copy and paste, reuse some code you had earlier. But I didn't say copy and paste. You didn't hear me say copy and paste. But you know what I mean? It's not a difficult problem. It's a problem that's been solved many times before. It's only complicated. You just got to know how to do that in this programming language and that environment and how to deploy here. However, if you've never done those things before, well, actually, to you, the problem seems more complex because you haven't solved those problems. What's actually complex in that scenario isn't writing software. It's writing software that will run in a brand new nuclear submarine in that particular environment, in that particular situation. It's the requirements side. It's the problem space that you're trying to solve with the software that is complex. And that's where we get lost. It's actually, we look at the easy bit and we focus. It's like when we look at cost on teams. If you think of a typical agile team with $1,000 a day people, and there's 10 of them, so that's 10 grand a day, and you have a 10-day sprint, that's 100 grand a sprint. That's really, really simple. Anyone can understand that. A sprint costs 100 grand. So we focus on that side of the equation, the investment side of the equation, because it's easy to understand and it's tangible and it's real. It's an actual cost to us. Without understanding the cost of delay of the work that's being done and making that somehow quantitative, so you actually, a real number that you can measure. If you're working with 100 grand a sprint and the value you deliver isn't worth 100 grand a sprint, you're doing the wrong work. You should just sack them. It doesn't make sense. Well, not sack the people, but do something useful with them. But if you're doing something that's worth 500 grand a sprint, okay, we've got 5-to-1 ROI. Let's focus on the R, because once you realize return on investment, the R is the bigger number. Why would you make cuts? Isn't that kind of like trying to go bust deliberately? I mean, I could make any company you want right now run at zero cost. And literally, it means sacking everyone and closing the doors. We would cost nothing more. No more return would be made, but there'd be no more investment either. And, doing it in a smaller way, it seems to me fairly like it's the same thing. Surely, if return on investment the return is higher, the question is, where do you want to go today? Now we've got this investment in these wonderful people and put them together in an awesome team. Where are we going to go now? What's the next most valuable thing we can work on? And if you've run out of that, then you're kind of in a real bit of a business hole, I guess.
It's interesting because I'm sort of looking at patterns and this whole no projects thing as well, which is I ran a team and I got the job as being an agile project manager, whatever that is. I think it's a sort of oxymoron, isn't it? But having finished it, we then ran for 4 years doing agile and we built the product, because the project just delivered something that just about works. And then we really made something that was really quite a thing of beauty. But the challenge was that the organization just couldn't get their heads around the idea of no projects or BAU. So after 4 years of creating a yearly project budget and giving us the money, they ran into financial trouble and went down the tube. Oh, well, they didn't go down the tube. They cut us all loose because we're just a cost, because they still had us sat there as a project which they could cut rather than keeping the product going. What was interesting is the very reason the project was being done in the first place was the fact that the original platform had gone burning platform, gone out of date, and I'm thinking now, how long have they got to work with this project that we've finished and the product that we built and we've walked away from before they'll come back and some consultancy will come to me and say, we've got this product burning platform, we need a project to be delivered. You think it's just this sort of loop of cause and effect. But I just feel there that we did all this stuff, all this chaos turned from chaos into something simple, made it work, and there was no organizational learning from that for some reason. I don't know why. Just
yeah, it is funny. Yeah, I think you're right. I think we do what's easy before we do what's right sometimes. Again, I think this might be is that what kids do? So I remember, do you know the Marshmallow challenge? Have you all seen the Marshmallow challenge? Has anyone? You get like 26 of spaghetti and you get, string and tape and a marshmallow. And you've got to build the highest tower you can in this many minutes. And I was always told, because I saw the YouTube video or the TED talk, yeah, and kids are really good at this because they look at what everyone else is doing and take what's working. So I tried this when I was a Cub Scout leader with 10 and 11-year-olds. No, they really don't. If it was a 15-minute challenge, they knew after 5 minutes they weren't going to win and kept going anyway, while complaining about how they knew they weren't going to win. What on earth is that? That was just weird. I completely did not expect it and thought, all right, I'm not doing that again. But because they didn't have a good time. But it was a really, really weird one.
It's interesting when you play those games or you set those challenges. One I did is very similar, but it's more of an office-based one, which was you get an A3 sheet of paper and you have 3 teams or a number of teams, and you say, with that single piece of A3 paper, how high can you make this a standing structure that's and actually that's probably the first time you see people actually applying themselves to a problem and really working the problem, maybe as a team as well. It's interesting that and there is no answer. There is no this is the one way to do it, but because actually I've seen it done where everybody goes through all this angst of folding up origami style, doing all these sort of things, and at the end I just get an A3 sheet of paper and I fold it in half and say, that's your benchmark, by the way. And most of them are not even as high as the piece of paper just folded in half. So anyway, what can I say?
And deadlines as well. The Marshmallow game is a great game to see how deadlines affect people, because it's amazing how people all have like 10-inch towers, 10-inch tower, 10-inch tower. Last 30 seconds. Oh my God. Marshmallows on the table. 1 inch, 0 inches. Yeah, and it's amazing how 0 is the answer so many times for teams, because they lost track of time and then they rush at the end. Again, it kind of feels to me like that's a thing as well, but I'm not sure what the thing is. Okay, I think we're out of time for the whole recording and everything, aren't we? So yeah, that was fun. It's fun to see some people again.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell that people where they can find you, Dan, if they have more questions?
So I make myself really hard to find on the internet. I am Kanban Dan on Twitter, LinkedIn, or kanbandan.com. My email is kanbandan@gmail.com. I have a YouTube channel called, well, actually, that's Dan Brown's Kanban Dan, because you can't just take that name anymore. YouTube have been horrible with the namings for my channel and so on. But if you go to kanbandan.com, you'll find me. And you may notice I love a natter with people, about this stuff. And I don't think you have to be an expert to natter about it and find something useful in it. And I think that's kind of really my message today, is find a way to use this. Just for God's sake, understand the complexity before you take your approach.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Dan, for giving us a very interesting talk about. I mean, I don't know how not complex it was, but I feel like it was less complex than other talks about complexity I've seen. So
I tried.
Full points there. And thank you all for joining. Our speaker next week is Sasha Storz from the LKU. He hasn't given us a talk yet, so I'll rely on Helen to chase him, and keep an eye out on the Meetup channel to see when we post that. That's going to be on the 10th of March. And until then, it's goodbye from Helen, goodbye from me, and
thank you.
And bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dan.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks,
all.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Dan.
very much.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye.